Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I wanted to talk today because I got in a couple of questions over the last week about what religious trauma syndrome is. So I wanted to come on and do a video just about that because I don't think I've done one specifically for what religious trauma syndrome is. So that's going to be what today's video is. And if you don't know me, my name is Angel DeSantis. I grew up in a cult called the Children of God, and I now am a religious trauma counselor and a yoga teacher. So if you've been here a couple of times, go ahead, hit like and subscribe. I do videos around surrounding religious trauma and trauma. And I just wanted to read, I'm going to look down because I have my computer here, but I just wanted to read a couple of things about what religious trauma syndrome is and how it relates to my experience and your experience maybe. Maybe there's something in here that you feel is familiar or something that you recognize. So this is a definition of religious trauma syndrome by Marlene Winnell. And she says, religious trauma syndrome is the condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. They may be going through the shattering of a personally meaningful faith and or a breaking away from a controlling community and lifestyle. Religious trauma syndrome is a function of both the chronic abuses of harmful religion and the impact of severing one's connection with faith. It can be compared to a combination of PTSD and CPTSD. Religious trauma syndrome has a very recognizable set of symptoms, a definitive set of causes, and a debilitating cycle of abuse. There are ways to stop the abuse and recover. So that's kind of the definition of symptoms of religious trauma syndrome. And for me, the syndrome it's a condition experienced by people who are leaving an authoritarian dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. And I was born and raised in this cult, so having my brain develop underneath that authoritarian and dogmatic and abusive and oppressive religion, and then coming out of that, I lost my entire worldview and my entire mental structure. And the thing about those two things is I couldn't acknowledge them both at the same time, because not only does your world crumble, but also the mental structures are not there. And I think that the realizing both of those at the same time would be too devastating. So first I was able to kind of cope with my world changing, because I left the cult. This year it'll be 12 years. But I left the cult 12 years ago, and first just my external world changed, but internally everything was the same. I still tried to be Christian, and I still tried to be a good disciple and a good follower, and ask good Christians for advice, obey the men who told me what to do, and just be really mousy and really suppressive, really suppress the way that I had been taught to be as a woman. And I kept that, and the external world changed. And once I realized that I could survive the external world, then I could go into the internal world, which is the kind of the mental shift. When that started to happen, the mental shift of realizing, like, okay, if I can survive outside in this world, can I survive and have an opinion and still survive? Or can I survive and change jobs and still survive? So then once I realized that my survival in the external world was covered, then I started doing the internal work. And I think that that is an important distinction to make, because if you immediately go out and you can't survive the external world, then you certainly can't start excavating the internal world, because I feel like that's just too much. I don't know anyone who has dug up the internal world and managed to survive the devastation of realizing both at the same time, because it is a really deeply painful thing to come out of something like that and to lose your world, your external and internal world at the same time. Because for me, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone, and I was taught not to trust the external world. So for a while, I just had to learn how to survive by myself, because I didn't trust my employers. I tried to go to church a couple of times. That did not work out, because I didn't trust anybody. And when you don't trust anyone, including yourself, you don't know that you're going to survive. And when you don't know that you're going to survive, that's like the baseline that's the first thing that you need to cover for human development. If your survival is threatened, nothing else can develop. And the cult that I grew up in was apocalyptical. Is that the word? Apocalyptal? Apocalyptical. They believed in the end of the world. So the end of the world was always coming. So my survival was always threatened. So I couldn't really develop anything else. It was just like, will I survive through to the end of the day? Will I survive through to the end of the week? Um, and there's a specific way that your brain develops, that there are certain areas that cannot develop if you don't know that you're going to survive. And so I didn't know I was going to survive. But once that was covered, once I knew that I was going to survive, then you can start layering on the other parts of mental health. But until you know that you're going to survive, honestly, like nothing else can really happen. So there was a while there where I think the first 2 years was just me finding out if I could survive in the world. And it was just like taking whatever job that I could, living month to month, paying bills as they came. When I left, I had a husband, and we would spend $100 a week for the two of us on food. And at that time, that was like a lot of money. I remember being like, oh, we get a whole $100 for two people for the whole week. Like, wow, that's a lot. We never went out. We had no money. And it's just the trauma of that, of trying to enter the world. And mind you, at this point, I'm 23 and I don't know anybody. So you lose your entire world, and like you've disappointed all of your friends, you've disappointed all of your family, and you don't even know if you're going to survive. And that is a really heavy and very heavily traumatic thing to have to go through. So, so that's one of them. So this is under symptoms of religious trauma syndrome. Cognitive. Confusion, poor critical thinking ability, negative beliefs about self-ability and self-worth, black and white thinking, perfectionism, and difficulty with decision making. So, like I said, there's a reason why you have that. It's because, at least for me, because I was always under the threat for my survival. So why would I develop critical thinking skills? I can't. I'm trying to survive to the end of the day. Perfectionism and problems with decision making. I was never allowed to make a decision. When you are a woman in the church or a woman in a patriarchal religion, which I believe the only religion that is not patriarchal is Buddhism. If you know of another one, tell me, find it. But they're mostly patriarchal. So me being a woman growing up under this Christian umbrella, I was never taught to make decisions. It was never my job to form an opinion or to make a decision. And actually, if I ever did try to speak up, I was out of line and I would be punished. So I didn't know how to make decisions. I had very, very poor thinking ability. Definitely had I had zero critical thinking skills, which again immediately bleeds into low self-esteem and low self-worth, because you know that you don't know anything and you just can't figure things out. Things are not put in your brain properly. So there's that. And then this is a big one with the black and white thinking. And I think that it starts with the whole religious idea of heaven and hell. And there's purgatory in between, which is just a step above hell, but there's no area for growth. It's either you're right because you're listening to the elders of the church, or you're going to hell. And those are your options. There's nothing in between, unless it's the pastor sinning, in which case it's fine because he can get forgiveness. But everyone else, your options are heaven or hell. So when that comes to thinking, it's really hard for you to learn new things and go to the other side, quote unquote, because the other side is hell. And so you think, okay, either, I remember this really distinctly, I had admired this one girl, and she was somebody who I looked up to because she was a Christian girl. And I was like trying to be a good Christian girl, like I was taught to be. So I was trying to be quiet. I was trying to keep the house clean, do the laundry. And basically, in order to be a good Christian wife, you need to be a good maid. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to be like, don't have an opinion, just show up, be quiet and clean, and then your marriage will survive. And there was this one girl that I liked. she had nothing to do with the cult. She was a developed human being in the world who happened to be Christian. And at one point she posted a picture of her and her friends at a club. And she was like, girls night out, and she like posted a picture with like her and four of the girls having a drink. And my head went, oh my God, she's one of those people. I can't trust her anymore. I can't look up to her, because it's that black and white thinking of either she's pure and she's good, or she's going to hell and she's trash. And in that moment, that picture of her in the club changed my thinking from being like, she's superior, she belongs in heaven, she's lovely, I can look up to her, to being like, oh, she's one of those people. She's in a club, she's like drinking with her friends, so she obviously is going to hell. And then it became like, and all things, or not all things, most things for me were like this, where it's that black and white thinking, because again, you are not taught critical thinking skills, where it didn't even occur to me that maybe she was at a club with her friends having a drink. It was like, no, that behavior is bad behavior. That behavior takes you to hell. So there were quite a few moments where I was trying to like find out who I could trust, who was trustworthy. But because my mind was stuck in black and white thinking, it was very difficult for me to understand who was good and who was not, because the religion had taught me that certain behaviors are worthy of heaven, and the other ones, like God has to punish you, and because of that, you're going to hell. So next is emotional. And this is again symptoms of religious trauma syndrome. In the emotional department, depression, anxiety, anger, grief, loneliness, difficulty with pleasure, and loss of meaning. This was a really big one, because loss of meaning, when I was in this cult, I had tons of meaning. My life was really full. All of the needs on the humanity spectrum of the things that I need to express, like the anger, the having a goal, having a thing in your life that fulfills you, like God fulfilled me. Yeah, I had a goal, which was like to make it to the end of the world and be an end time soldier and like fight for Jesus. And I had community. I had pleasure within the confines of what I was told pleasure was. I had a lot of happiness because I had no responsibility, and I thought that was happiness, because ignorance sometimes is bliss. Like if you don't know what you don't know, that's enough sometimes. So I was really happy. And all of a sudden, all of that changes when you step outside that community. Suddenly there was so much anxiety. I was really, really, really anxious a lot of the times. I was incredibly lonely because I had grown up in communes with anywhere from 100 people to like 30 people. I was never in a commune with less than 20 people. And so I went from being with 20 people to being with one person, being with my husband. And then from that, I also went to eventually getting divorced and then being by myself. And all of that is really, really new. And I just didn't know how to function. Like as a human being, I did not know how to function with less than 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 people around me. So there was a lot of loneliness. And I lost a lot of meaning in my life. I lost God. And I think that, and I'll do another video on that, but it is really, really confusing and incredibly devastating to lose God when your meaning is wrapped up in that. So definitely I hit all of those things: depression, anxiety, anger, grief, loneliness, difficulty with pleasure, and loss of meaning. The next one is social. Loss of a network, family rupture, social awkwardness, sexual difficulty, behind schedule on developmental tasks. So loss of social network. Again, you disappoint all of your family and friends. Most people that I told were very disappointed in me, and also because I was leaving with my husband at the time. He was my fiance at that time. A lot of people were like, "You're choosing a boy over God," and like, how dare you? Like, God is going to have to take him from you because you're picking him over God. Like, now God has no choice. He's going to get into, like, your husband is going to get into an accident. God's going to have to kill him because you're putting him above God. You're showing God that you value this human life above a spiritually superior and moral life. So I was always afraid. For the first 2 years or more, but at least 2 years, that my husband was going to die. And if he was late, if he was like 1 minute late to come home, I thought that that meant God had found us and he was dead. Um, because that is what I was told as I was leaving, and I had believed it. Um, so you lose your family, you lose your friends, your family is disappointed in you, your friends are disappointed in you, and again, I'm in the world. I know no one in the world, so nobody can help, and it's really really difficult. I was definitely behind schedule on developmental tasks because, and this is my theory. And again, get in the comments if you'd like, give me information. But this is my theory on human development, is that the brain develops as it continues to take responsibility or accountability for things. And the brain will stop developing when it no longer needs to meet a challenge. And when you are in this structure of religion where you don't have to do anything, the pastor will tell you what to do, the pastor will guide your thoughts, or the cult leader will tell you what to do, or they'll guide your thoughts and they'll make the decisions and they'll tell you, oh, you should do this because God wants you. You shouldn't do this because God doesn't want you. And when you're in that space, somebody else is making all your decisions, so you never have to expand. You also never have to take responsibility, because then you can say like, oh, this business didn't work out because I didn't listen to my pastor, or because God must have wanted it. Or something happens and you can just write it off as like God has a plan, so you never have to take responsibility, and so you stop growing. And so for me, I was definitely behind schedule on developmental tasks because I had never taken responsibility. If something would happen, I would be like, God's plan, like Drake. um, but yeah, I would just write it off. And when you can write something off, I think the moment you stop taking responsibility for your life is the moment that your brain stops developing in that area. So I know some people who are much older physically than I am, but their brain is much like farther behind because they stop taking responsibility for their lives the moment they join the cult. Because that way everything is up to the cult leader, or everyone is everything is not their fault or not their responsibility. So I was behind. So that is a symptom of religious trauma. The final one is cultural. Unfamiliarity with the secular world, feeling like a fish out of water. You feel a very big difficulty belonging, and you have information gaps. Let me tell you about the information gaps. So I've never been to school. I actually have been, but it was to perform and dance for the people going to school. But I have huge information gaps. I no longer feel like that's a bad thing, because if there's an information gap, I'll fill it. I'll be like, hey, I need information on that. I don't know anything about it. Give me tell me explain it to me like I'm 5. And I haven't found that it has held me back. I think my view of it has been the thing that's held me back, where I've been like, oh, I don't know, so I guess I don't belong in the room. And now I'm like, no, I belong in the room, so please update me on this information that I'm missing. But for a while, it definitely holds you back a lot. And I know other people who grew up either being homeschooled or in really religious schools where they just will not teach you evolution, or they just will not teach you chemistry, or they will not teach you science. And then you're expected to go out into the world and survive it, when it's like, well, you have information gaps. You don't quite understand how the world works because you don't have the information. So it's like, the world, you need this much information to survive, and the religious people give you this much information. And so then you have this huge gap to fill just to be where everyone else's baseline of knowledge is. And that can feel, again, that damages your self-esteem, and that gives you a huge information gap. So I definitely felt that. Definitely felt like a fish out of water, and I felt like I didn't belong in the world, which again, when you know no one in the world and you have no skills, it's not difficult to feel like you don't belong, because you don't. And that can feel, again, really devastating, because I didn't know anything, and I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And even culturally, I'm half Chinese and half Italian, but I grew up in Japan, but I didn't grow up in Japanese culture. But then I'm here, but then I don't feel like an American because I didn't grow up in American culture. And I missed out on kind of a bunch of social bars. Like, I don't know what high school is like. I don't know what college is like. I don't know, yeah, what it's like to go into a job interview and be like, here's my resume, here's my schooling, please call my professors, or please call, the people that I previously worked for, or I interned here or there. Like, I get none of that. So it it can feel very, very difficult. um okay, moving on. Those were all symptoms. Now we are on to causes, so the things that cause religious trauma syndrome. So and this is from, again, I'll link the article, I'll put it down in the description. And I will link Marlene Winnell's YouTube channel. And if I can't find her channel, I'll put a link to a video that she does here, because she is the one who actually created that, um, created the term of religious trauma syndrome. So, causes of religious trauma syndrome: authoritarianism coupled with toxic theology, which is received and reinforced at church, school, or at home, which can result in the suppression of normal child development. Cognitive, social, emotional, and moral stages are arrested in development. This one really kills me, and I think that I didn't realize how evil it actually was until I became much older and kind of realized what children are, and where they're just sponges, and they will absorb whatever you give them, and they're really innocently trying to express the things that we are all made of. And religious trauma suppresses it so aggressively and under pain of death. Like, if you develop this part of you, you're going to hell. And that is just something that is so evil and so detrimental to human development that, yeah, the suppression of normal childhood development, I think, is one of the most evil things you can do. And it's usually always done by somebody who perceives themselves to be morally superior. So that drives me up the wall. Okay. Damage to normal thinking and feeling abilities. Information is limited and controlled. Dysfunctional beliefs are taught. Independent thinking is condemned, and your feelings are condemned. This is why I'm in therapy. Because, yeah, you are literally taught to be mentally ill. It is something that's taught. If you are left to your own devices and you get to go through your human development as you should, you will generally grow up to be fairly well developed. And they literally teach you to be mentally ill. They teach you dysfunctional thinking, or not to think entirely, and they teach you very dysfunctional beliefs that are impossible to hold together. They teach you two extremes and tell you to hold it inside of yourself. They tell you, sex is disgusting, and then they tell you, God made it, and you're somehow supposed to figure out how to hold both of those things at the same time. Or they will tell you that you are made in the image of God, and then they'll also tell you you're terrible. And again, somehow you're supposed to reconcile both of those things, and it makes no sense, but it's taught to you, and it limits your ability to develop and think correctly. So independent thinking is condemned. I would see this. Our cult particularly would have camps that they would send off the bad kids to. It was called, what was it, the TTC, for teen training camps. And they would literally send off the most brilliant thinkers. They would send off the brightest kids, the people who were the most independent. They would send them to this TTC, and they would literally beat the crap out of them in order to get them to stop thinking and stop being independent. So yes, it was definitely, independent thinking was definitely condemned. And then your feelings are condemned. And again, this is why I'm in therapy. But it's that moment where, like, your feelings are important, and your feelings are there because, again, it's a stage of human development. Humans are supposed to have feelings. But when you're in something that is abusive and they want you to stay, then the actual problem does become your feelings. And if they can take your feelings out of you, then you will stay. Because again, when you're in something that's abusive, you do feel it, and you do get those signals from your gut that, like, this is wrong, I don't like this, I want to go. And if they can demonize those feelings, and you learn to demonize your own feelings, then you think, I'm wrong, I shouldn't have doubts, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't feel jealous, I shouldn't be wanting more for myself, I shouldn't be selfish, I shouldn't be ambitious. Then your feelings become the problem, And if you can learn how to hate your own feelings, then you will continue to stay in this thing that they want you to stay in, which is an abusive thing. Okay, moving on. External locus of control. What does that mean? Okay. Oh, okay. An external locus of control. Knowledge is revealed to you, but you don't get to discover it naturally. There is a hierarchy of authority enforced, and yourself is not a reliable or good source. That's something that they teach you. So, yeah, knowledge is given to you, but you never get to discover it by yourself. You're never allowed to ask questions or be curious. Somebody else controls the flow of information, and that's why you will usually see with these extremely religious people, the thing that they hate is education, and the thing that they will demonize is education. And they'll try and make you hate people who are educated. We had this one saying that was like, oh, don't be so open minded that your brain falls out. And that was a thing that we would say to educate. Like, I would say that to educated people. You know, they'd be like, oh, you're closed minded. And I would be like, well, I don't want to be so open minded that my brain falls out. And that was my line, to try and make educated people feel stupid. And like looking back, I'm like, oh, like not good. And obviously I was the one that was uneducated, but it's that thing where like, if they can keep knowledge from you, they win. And that's really what they try is they try and keep all of the knowledge for themselves, because there were so many things that happened in the cult, even with, they produced a lot of music, right? And the singers who were in the cult, they were like really talented people in the cult, they would have to sign away their legal rights to the song that they were recording. So it's like someone at the top knew about this. Someone at the top knew about the legalities of music, and they knew about rights, and they knew about all of that, but they wouldn't reveal that to the people signing away their talent. And so even after those singers would leave the cult and be like, hey, can I have my tracks? They would be like, no, you signed them over to us. Because somebody at the top has all the knowledge. They just don't give it to you because you don't matter. You don't deserve it. And they give it to you only if you really, really need it. So again, knowledge is revealed, not discovered. There's a hierarchy of authority enforced, and yourself is not a reliable or good source. And I remember doing this where on the few times that I would try to speak up, I'd be like, hey, I just don't think this is right, or I don't like this, or I don't like, this doesn't feel good. And then it would be somebody else would come in and override me and be like, look, Angel, the reason you're having these problems is because you're not spiritual enough, or you're not, you're basically just not good enough. Like, who you are is not, or your feelings is not a good enough reason for us not to do this thing that you hate. Or, okay, so you're uncomfortable, or you don't want to do this, or you think so and so is being treated unfairly, but like that's kind of just your opinion, and so we're going to do it anyway because you don't count. So it's just this constant reminder that like who I am and what I feel doesn't matter. And finally, physical and sexual abuse, patriarchal power, unhealthy sexual views, and punishment used as discipline. That is kind of something that I think we see a lot. I mean, if you just look at the Catholic Church and the amount of abuse that they do, that they've done, and the amount that they've gotten, honestly, that they've totally gotten away with, because they have this whole thing where they keep the abusers safe. Because again, the abusers are at the top. They have all the knowledge, they have all the power. And so what that they're abusing you? So what that you don't like it? That's just how you feel, and your feelings don't matter. So super unhealthy, obviously, sexual abuse, a lot of abuse. There was a bunch of abuse in the cult that I was in, and punishment, physical punishment used as discipline. And it was like aggressive physical punishment, which again, just this has, at this point, this has nothing to do with religion. This is just abuse. This is physical and sexual abuse, which if you have suffered through, then you might want to look at PTSD and CPTSD, from ongoing trauma. And this is where it switches from religious trauma to just trauma. But yeah, so those are the causes of it: physical and sexual abuse, external locus of control, knowledge not being accessible to you to discover, damaged normal thinking, suppression of normal childhood development, among many other things. So if any of this has resonated with you, and any of it has, you're like, oh, I've experienced that, or like, ooh, our church kind of did that, or like, if any of this has made sense, then I encourage you to um, keep on being curious, because the thing that they take from you is your curiosity, and they take your joy. They take that. And if you can reignite your curiosity and your joy, then you get the knowledge back that you missed out on, and you get the self esteem back that they tried to take from you. So, my advice is to work on those two things: cultivate your curiosity, ask questions, and also go get your joy. There is a amount of joy that you deserve, that it's like built into your DNA to experience joy. And that is what they are trying to, that's what they try and take from you with this. They try and suppress the human development out of you so that you cannot feel your own feelings. And they do this through so many ways, a myriad of ways. But get your curiosity back, ask questions, delve into the things that you want to know, and go get your joy. So that is my advice. I hope that this was helpful in kind of explaining a little bit more what religious trauma syndrome is. And again, I do offer counseling. So if you are in a space where you need that, or you know of someone who does, please reach out. I want to help. And I want to continue to talk about and raise awareness around this subject. So I hope that this was helpful. Thank you guys for tuning in, and go get your joy.